So within any target tissue, we can picture testosterone having its effect. So androgens have a very potent anabolic effect on the body, and especially skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscles are filled with proteins, all kinds of proteins, actin, myosin, and all the proteins that associate with it, housekeeping proteins, mitochondrial proteins, glycolysis proteins, proteins that will produce the glycogen, store the energy for that big event. So someone on androgens, or in general, the androgens help to sustain those, the expression of many of those genes. Someone that takes an exogenous anabolic androgen steroid will increase the drive for the expression of those genes and increase the protein content within the skeletal myocytes. In an individual that would take exogenous androgens, what would their LH and FSH profiles look like, plasma profiles? Be very low, right? What would the endogenous testosterone levels look like? Endogenously synthesized, coming from the interstitial cells. You just told me LH and FSH are low, so that's got to be low. And the GnRH is going to be low as well. So the whole system is shut up. So what happens to individuals that have taken anabolic steroids at quite high levels, and there are quite a few examples of former athletes, if they've done that for a long period of time, can they recover? No, they end up having to be on testosterone supplement and have little teeny tiny testicles all the rest of their life. So there's many instances of that. If they don't have brain tumor, liver tumor, or a heart attack. So now we can use the remaining 10 minutes to discuss the female reproductive system and the menstrual cycle. And as I said, a lot more detail is in the lecture that I recorded this morning and that will be posted sometime later today or early tomorrow morning. So the menstrual cycle is a product of a unique regulation within the female HPG axis. It is cyclic, and it follows basically a lunar cycle due to its average length. It doesn't have a tight correlation to that, but there can be, in cases where females live together, there can be a dominant female through pheromones that can get all the other females to begin cycling at the same time. My wife has always had that. Every roommate she had eventually came onto her cycle, and now she's got her daughter on her cycle as well. So there are many factors that can impact it. Pheromones are one of those. So there are two goals of the menstrual cycle: to recruit and sustain to maturity a single ovum in humans, and in other animals of the multiple mature ovum, and then to prepare the uterine lining for implantation and gestation. So there are two cycles actually within the menstrual cycle. When we look at the organs that are involved, there's the ovarian and the uterine, and each will have multiple phases. The menstrual cycle itself will have phases. The ovarian and as well the uterine will have their own cycles, terms that describe the anatomical and physiological events that are occurring. And they are all centered on ovulation. I say midpoint, but it isn't exactly midpoint. We always hear 28 days, but it can be shorter or longer than that. And we'll see that one phase is fixed at 14, and to get right at it, it's the luteal phase after ovulation before the beginning of the next menstrual cycle. So basically for the menstrual cycle, there's all the events before ovulation and all the events after ovulation. So you can be collectively referring to pre-ovulatory and post-ovulatory. With the ovarian, before ovulation, corresponding to pre-ovulatory, is going to be follicular, ovulation, the change point, and then the luteal phase will be the post-ovulatory phase. For the uterine, there will be two pre-ovulatory, menstrual and proliferative, and then after ovulation will be the secretory. So we'll look at this in a graphical illustration first before we look at the classic one that we see in the textbooks. So first, for the menstrual cycle, there are the 3 phases. If we add ovulation in there, of course, it's just an instant in time, basically, compared to the length of the others. So the pre-ovulatory and the post-ovulatory. During the pre-ovulatory phase, we're going to see a change in the feedback mechanisms. Initially, a very sensitive negative feedback, and this asterisk draws our attention immediately that this is the target zone of sensitivity for negative feedback for the oral contraceptive. The oral contraceptive, of course, is typically started at the end of menstruation, or if someone is taking it, they discontinue on one day, typically a Sunday, and then the following Sunday start again. So the menstrual phase is exogenously driven to 7 days in that case, even though menses may not be continuous during that full 7 days. But basically, we picture this time point when the first oral contraceptive pill is taken in this cycle, and it targets this very sensitive negative feedback, and it will prevent the natural progression of all the changes that would occur. In particular, it prevents, through a mechanism we'll describe, and it's given again in detail in the lecture that will be posted, it prevents the events that will cause a switch to a positive feedback such that estrogen will cause a greater release of luteinizing hormone, and then that luteinizing hormone triggers the ovulation. So the oral contraceptive pill is going to prevent this switch in molecular mechanisms from a negative to a positive feedback, and thereby prevent the LH surge and prevent ovulation. Of course, it's always also going to minimize development of follicles and development of a corpus luteum, so not much progesterone will be present other than what's in the pill, so that the uterine cycles and the anatomical and physiological changes are attenuated as well. Doesn't mean that someone can't get pregnant on the pill and sustain a pregnancy, but these are the mechanisms that we want to disclose in this discussion. After ovulation, there's an immediate switch back to negative feedback. So we can just picture in here LH increasing because there's low steroids from the ovaries, and as the LH increases, more estrogen is going to be present. As more estrogen is present, we switch to positive feedback, the LH surges, and there's an immediate return because we switch thereby almost immediately after ovulation, even before the ovulation, just after the LH surge, switch back to a negative feedback and return to low levels that are going to taper off. So in the ovarian cycle, pre-ovulatory is going to be follicular recruitment and development. During the menstrual phase, we don't have follicles that are, we don't have a corpus luteum. Well, I better exclude myself then. Anyway, there aren't a lot of the hormones 3 because the corpus luteum will have disappeared. And I know I'm jumping it all together, but we'll then go through it in each cycle, start to finish. Let's try to picture the whole thing and then do start to finish and then review it again collectively. So we don't have the contribution from the corpus luteum, so the hormones 3 are low, thereby we lose the endometrial lining in the menstrual phase, and hormones 1 and 2 can begin to increase, and that's what is beginning to recruit the follicles very early in the cycle. We recruit follicles, they develop. Again, I guess we're on these molecules, so we're doing that. The follicles are recruited, they develop, they produce more estrogen. The more estrogen they produce, the closer we get to switching to positive feedback, and there will be the LH surge at the level of the pituitary. One mature ovum that will ovulate, and that the remaining cells in the ovary will convert to the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is going to secrete high levels of progesterone and some estrogen that are very potent, especially together at the levels of the combinations that they produce, with negative feedback, so it will destroy itself. It will eliminate through negative feedback its trophic input from the anterior pituitary within 14 days. Within 10 to 12 days, it'll basically be non-functional. By 14 days, it's gone, and the plasma steroid levels are low enough. We now revert back to the beginning of the next cycle, such that they don't sustain the endometrium, and we trigger the next menstrual phase. So as we recruit the follicles, more estrogen targets its receptor in the endometrium and triggers mitotic division of many different cell types, and we get proliferation. So a rebuilding of the endometrium in preparation for the next chance at pregnancy. After ovulation, the corpus luteum is releasing the progesterone, targeting the same endometrial cells, especially the glandular cells, such that they begin to secrete nutritive solutions onto the surface of the uterine epithelial lining in anticipation of a fertilized ovum or zygote to arrive and implant. There's a lot of other changes that take place in the cells of the endometrium to store a lot of glycogen and lipids, and they undergo a response to release all of those when the implantation will begin. So there's a tremendous amount of cellular and molecular physiology that is occurring. So here we see those profiles then. Early in the cycle, there is not a corpus luteum, so hormones 3 are low, so hormones 1 and 2 are going to increase. They'll recruit follicles. They always show just a single one, but there's multiple ones recruited. Only one from one ovary, even though there's recruitment from both ovaries, only one follicle from one ovary will be selected through yet an unknown process to mature. But as they are all developing and contributing to estrogen, it peaks and switches to positive feedback, LH and an FSH surge, immediate switch back to negative feedback just before ovulation. And this is about a day to a day and a half before ovulation, so the home test kits to get pregnant test for the presence of LH in the urine, so you've got about a day to a day and a half before ovulation. So they are somewhat reliable predictors. As soon as the LH and FSH begin to drop due to the negative feedback, hormone 3 should go down. And the corpus luteum will be developed, and it very rapidly will synthesize a lot of progesterone that will increase even under this trophic drive, but a potent negative feedback ultimately tapering to the end point. So if we follow the hormone 3 profiles, we see low estrogen and progesterone, losing the functional layer of the endometrium, and then estrogen levels begin to increase, proliferative phase, and the glands and the vessels are all well developed by ovulation, and now the progesterone will trigger the synthesis and release or secretion of the solutions, nutritive solutions from the glands onto the surface.